Narratives do not necessarily reflect factual matters. Obtaining and analyzing such accounts are not primarily questions of what really happened or how trustworthy our clients or informants are. Rather, narratives usually contain some kind of subjective emplotment. They are temporarily fashioned statements tailored to fit particular contexts and agendas, and adapted either to retrospective or future orientations. As social and psychological beings, we construct ourselves and pattern our lives after familiar stories and via storytelling conventions that are culturally circumscribed. Stories help human beings forge a sense of coherence that experience lacks. Their implicit reflexivity implies that the speaker is always moral, even if the character in the story is not. Autobiographical narratives is simply the activity of explaining oneself by telling one's story. Individuals and groups develop stories to inform significant audiences, including themselves, how they want to be read by others. Thus, narratives usually point to sources of legitimation and imply emotions. Stories can also generate meaning because plots tend to explain why. Social entities, be it families, gangs, leisure groups, social movements, formal organizations, ethnic groups, or even nations, offer a repertoire of ready-made stories that individuals and collectives can make productive use of, modify, or contradict in their dialogues and power struggles. Thus, we can understand collectively authored master narratives, formula stories, or schematas, whatever you call them, as essential cultural artifacts or tools. Personal and small group narratives allow the linking of diverse events into unified and meaningful wholes, or to map one's position. Individuals can, for instance, use an account of their peers' achievements to locate themselves within a particular birth or educational cohort. Institutional narratives comprise types of actors engaged in types of acts with expectable moral evaluations. For instance, target clients in social policies such as the welfare queen, battered women, veterans. Types, in contrast to specific people in all their complexity, become difficult to contradict when they are located in policies. A service for the homeless must of course classify and ascribe categorical identities to its clients in line with its task. Work organizations may create new narratives in ongoing social processes, perhaps as part of some problem-solving effort. As researchers, we may be interested in when and how specific narratives entered social policy or a particular organization. On the macro level, socially circulated and collectively authored master narratives may compile rival stories even within the same moral universe. Consider the feminist, any social movements will try to change dominant lines of reasoning unfavorable to their own cause. Sometimes a protesting group can benefit from casting themselves in opposition to an influential cultural narratives, like the knitting black mothers and grandmothers who meet in certain parks in the American South and pose as competent community and homemakers, in contrast to the dominant story of negligent parenting among the urban poor. As researchers, we can listen to and apply the tales people convey in alternative ways, say as records of lived life, as basis for scientific interpretation of experiences and situations, or as input to the constitution of specific selves. Let me illustrate briefly. We begin with narratives as record. Social scientists have more often than once recorded how young people develop certain storylines that encourage a wide circle of people to embrace new drug rituals. These are just examples. Narratives as interpretation. In the early 1970s, the sociologist Al Korbel wondered what kind of experience recently arrived young men from Pakistan were able to carve out for themselves in the not very welcoming Oslo. By collecting their personal accounts, she was able to draw a nuanced, sociological valid picture. A constitutive view of narrative takes the notion that we live by our stories quite literally. An actor's account does not only emerge from experience, but helps to shape it. He or she is the protagonist of an evolving life history. How then can we design narrative approaches in empirical investigation? The brief answer is that an adequate theory or model is very helpful. Again, let's have a look at some examples. Margareta Järvinen and Charlotte Bloch relied on Candace Clark's theory of sympathy investment and emotional response when they studied how workers who grew up with one or two alcoholic parents related to this problem in retrospect. They found that the adult's ascription of sympathy, positive feelings, forgiveness was related to three types of accounts. Either how the parents had lived up to normal parental obligations, how they had reciprocated to the child, and lastly, to the worker's own moral conceptions of alcohol problems as either self-inflicted or caused by uncontrollable circumstances. Accounting for a life is always a cognitive achievement rather than a through the clear crystal bowl recital of something given. According to Jerome Brunner, there is a landscape of action where events evolve, and there is a landscape of consciousness and inner world of the person involved in the action. To reach the latter is not easy. The best strategy can sometimes be to talk about the former, as I did with a male stamp collector, whose albums chronicle both the torn history of the former Soviet Union, as well as his own biographical losses as an ex-communist and a researcher manqué. I quote him, "I suppose you could say that this interest has satisfied my urge to research. Here you see the motive you find in all the standard stamps, the worker, the farmer, and the Red Army soldier," he says. "What I find fascinating is the fact that they were lithographed first, and some of them had fine perforations, then they became typographed, then you had typographed finely perforated ones, then you got the typographed coarsely perforated ones, then they got a watermark, and then they were imperforated and watermarked. All of this has filled up my albums. Nobody has ever taken this seriously before. I think I became interested in Russian stamps, first because I was a youth communist, and it was the promised land, and second because I was very interested in history and the lessons you can learn from stamps about history over there. In a sense, he made the analysis for me. Stories do essential work in social life, according to Charles Tilly, by cementing people's commitments to common projects, helping people make sense of what's going on, channeling collective decisions and judgment, and spurring people to action they would otherwise be reluctant to pursue. Stories lend themselves to vivid, compelling accounts of what has happened, what will happen, or what should happen. They play a significant part across a wide range of social life, not least in political mobilization, conflicts, and change. To trace political change, social scientists should listen to those who are speaking defiantly wherever they are, Tilly advocates. Serious investigation of that which perhaps surprisingly intervenes in the routine formation of political interest and agendas, with special attention to changing public identities. That is the clue. All narratives are somehow shaped by culturally transmitted cognitive patterns and social conventions and processes that structure perceptions, organize memory, construct purpose, and guide the telling of stories. Yet there are also many individual components and adaptations. It follows from our three examples that the actors whose lives and circumstances we are interested in communicate their stories by word of mouth, in writing, visually through gestures of various kinds, in the shape of actions, or mediated through material objects, as the collector did. What they pursue by telling their stories is our empirical challenge to find out. It could be identity, resilience, cooperation, resistance, conflict, or much, much more. Studying narratives is a feature of nearly all qualitative research, so there are no quick fixes in design and analysis.